Do we want to start the record? Perfect. Beat me to it. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. Many people know that there is no safe level of lead, but did you know that lead poisoning is an environmental justice issue? This is something we're going to be exploring tonight, and we're really excited to have everybody join us. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. Please type in any questions you have into the Q&A box. If you have any technical issues, Melly and Mackenzie are our technical people behind the scenes. If you're having issues at all, please use the chat to send one of them a direct message. For closed captioning, you can go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, find the More button that has the 3 dots and click on View Captions. As I said, we'll be taking questions at the end, but you can put them in the Q&A box at any point. If you're connecting via the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and we will call on you and unmute you by using the last 4 digits of your phone number. Lead poisoning affects millions of people each year, but does not affect children and their families equally. Children who come from low-income means or who are from Black and Brown areas or communities are affected disproportionately more than other racial groups. You want to go to the next slide, Becca? So this is just kind of the slide, the schedule. My name is Tracy Gregoire. I'm the Healthy Children Project Director for the Learning Disabilities Association of America. As LDA suggests, we work with people with learning disabilities, but our Healthy Children Project works to prevent exposure to harmful chemicals that are linked to learning, attention, behavior, and developmental disabilities, and to protect the health of all families from unnecessary chemicals. And we focus on neurotoxins like lead that affect children's brain health. And the good news is that those exposures, those chemical exposures, are totally preventable. Next slide. Next, I'm going to introduce Rebecca Meuninck, or Becca, who is with the Ecology Center and co-facilitating with me today. Rebecca has worked for over 20 years in the environmental health field and worked with many families and professionals across the state of Michigan, where she lives. She coordinates the environmental health policy, education, and outreach campaigns for the Ecology Center. She has worked with lead-impacted families across Michigan and also helps lead the Great Lakes Lead Elimination Network. So thanks, Becca, for co-facilitating. And she's going to share a little bit about her organization.
Thank you, Tracy. So I work for the Ecology Center. We're an organization that really works at the intersection of human health and the environment. And we work at the local level in Southeast Michigan, where we're based in Detroit and Ann Arbor, at the state level, the regional level, and even the national level sometimes. On lead poisoning, as Tracy said, we do a lot of work. Mackenzie and Melly are here, and so the others on our team, to empower lead-impacted families to advocate for public policy and to prioritize the impacted families' perspective in the public policy arena. I serve on the state's lead commission, and we're happy to do that here in Michigan, some other coalitions, and we also founded the network that I'm going to talk about next, the Great Lakes Lead Elimination Network. So this is a coalition that's come together in the last few years, focused on all 8 of the Great Lakes states, and what are the shared policy priorities and best practices that we can work on to reduce lead poisoning in our states. You can see a long list, and we'll share these slides, I should say, with everyone afterwards, of the co-hosting partners for this webinar. And you can click on those links when you do get the file for the webinar to find out more about our partners. The reason that we focused on the Great Lakes in particular, and I know we have a nationwide audience tonight, so bear with us for a moment as to why we're focusing on the Great Lakes first. There is a very high proportion of an older housing stock that's common across the Great Lakes states. There's a shared history of racist housing policies like redlining, which we're going to talk about tonight, a shared history of heavy industrial pollution, sometimes with lead poisoning. And many of our states are in the top 10 in terms of levels of number of children with elevated blood lead levels above the national average, including Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. And also in terms of the number of lead service lines in our states, we have Illinois at number 1, Ohio at 2, Michigan at 3, New York at 4, Wisconsin at 6, Indiana at 7, and Minnesota at 10 in the country. So there's a lot of commonalities between our states, and we feel like we can work together with both folks who are working at the municipal level in cities and folks that are working at the state level to find the best ways to protect children from lead. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tracy.
Oceanna Fair and Robin Brown are leading the lead work in their communities. They are the experts, and we're so happy to have them both with us today. I believe we need to follow the lead of those most effective and let them speak for themselves, and they certainly do a great job explaining things and talking about their communities. It is my honor to introduce both of our presenters tonight, sharing their personal experience. Robin Brown is the CEO of Concerned Citizens Organized Against Lead, or CCOAL, in Cleveland, Ohio. Robin and her family have been directly impacted by lead poisoning. Robin is a founder, CEO, executive director, and parent advocate of Healthy Homes for CCOAL. She is a parent of 2 children. Her youngest was severely lead poisoned in 1999. She helps organizations and agencies with developing programs to meet the community needs for lead poison intervention. Next slide. Our other presenter tonight is Oceanna Fair. She lives in the South Side, or she is the South Side branch leader of Families for Lead Freedom Now. She is a mother, grandmother, and retired nurse. She lives on the South Side of New York. She is a civic leader and a person whose family has been affected directly by childhood lead poisoning. Mrs. Fair is a fierce advocate in the fight to end childhood lead poisoning. In November 2021, she provided testimony to lawmakers during our New York State Senate hearing on childhood lead poisoning, the first of its kind since 1994. So thank you, Oceanna and Robin, for joining us today.
And so we now want to turn it over to our experts to share a little bit about their stories of being parents and grandparents of lead impacted kids. And I forget who's going to go first here, but take it away. And then what the format is, I will have a few questions and things like that as they go through their presentation. But I'm going to stop the share right now so that y'all can see just them. And Robin, you're on mute. There you go.
Hi, my name is Robin Brown, and thank you guys for having me here tonight. It's an opportunity of a lifetime to be able to share our stories to you guys about how lead is actually impacting us. There's a difference of knowing about lead and working around lead, but living with lead is a total big difference. For me, my story started in 1999 when my daughter was exposed to lead at a 70 micrograms per deciliter. My first experience with this, not knowing anything and not seeing any symptom that led me to know my daughter was sick, other than receiving a phone call from her private paid insured doctor to have her direct admit in the hospital so that she can receive chelation therapy. Chelation therapy is not a treatment for lead. It's a therapy, exactly as it says. It helps bring lead out of the child's body when it is actually on a high level over 35 micrograms per deciliter. Is when they usually do chelation therapy. That therapy itself is torturous to children. It's a every 4-hour shot that has to be given in the thigh area only. And it's so bad, they remove children out of their room to receive the treatment so that they won't have trauma with hospitals, nurses, and things of that nature. For me, this a 5-day experience put me into the redlining and racism in the healthcare space. I had paid for private pay insurance and my doctor never showed up for 5 days. A doctor that has been in my life for probably 15 years before my daughter was born. So he was very, very familiar with our family and he didn't show up. That's who I was relying on. That's who I was waiting on. And what I received in between was the hospital physician that I had no relationship with. And he would always come in a room with his back to me as the parent speaking to his interns. Through that experience on the 4th day, and I had to have an inspection to my home for my daughter to be discharged from the hospital. That was the first day I learned about lead poisoning from the lead inspector as he was inspecting the home. And look, boy, did it floor me. The only thing I told him at that time is that you have to tell me who's going to help me because I've already been failed by the systems that's supposed to have helped me. It's already failed me. So how do I have trust in the hospital space, the medical space that was supposed to be the main space to help me? What he gave me was another parent name. And that parent, I can say today, is the reason that my daughter has the success from lead poisoning that she has. She has, it's 23 years now, and she does still show her anxiety, her not able to multitask, her impulsiveness, not sometimes realizing actions have consequences after she does it. These are things that, really hurt. But I'm going to give time for my partner to share a little bit of her stories as we go forth, and I'll come back with a little bit of mine because we have a lot to share. So.
Thank you, Robin. So as Tracy said, my name's Oceanna Fair, and I am from Syracuse, New York. I've been a lifelong resident of Syracuse, New York, and a lifelong resident living on the South Side. For my family, childhood lead poisoning has now become generational. So my brother was poisoned back in 1982 in a home that my parents were renting at that time. As a child, I didn't understand where all of the seizures came from, why we spent tons of time up at the clinic of our local hospital for his treatments. He was in and out of the hospital. But I did watch my 2-year-old brother, who seemed to be a normal 2-year-old, suddenly stop doing all the things that he used to do. He stopped talking. He stopped playing with us as he normally would. He became very angry. He grew up to rely on my parents for all of his care, and now he has outlived both of them. So now he relies on my brother and I for all of his care. We have aides come to his home 5 days a week to do things that a lot of us take for granted, to shower, to cook his meals, simply to just go out in public to attend events, because he has the mind of an 8-year-old. And so we can't let him wander the streets alone because he can be in danger. I thought we had cured childhood lead poisoning. I didn't think it was an issue. And almost 40 years later, my granddaughter gets poisoned in my home. And even once she got poisoned, I thought, she's that 1 in a million kid, and we just happen to be in that one house that still has this paint. And as I began doing my research to figure out how I could get help for not only my granddaughter, but to make sure that my home was safe for all of my grandchildren, I started to learn that here in Syracuse, we were still poisoning about 600 kids per year. Even though we live in a county of 400,000 people, where Syracuse only makes up 30% of that population, we have the burden of 90% of the lead poisoning cases here in our county. To add further insult to injury, we can pretty much go right down to zip code and look at exactly where these houses are, and they happen to land in all of the communities that were traditionally redlined back when red line practices were going on, the traditional Black and brown communities. In Syracuse, we also have the #1 childhood poverty rate for a city our size. And all of those children live in those same zip codes. But I know childhood lead poisoning has now become generational for my family. And that means many families around me are also experiencing that generational curse. And that's when I picked up my fight and said, not another child, not on my watch. Whatever we need to do to make this change, we will.
And you know what? Your story is so much like mine. Even though we are in different locales, I'm a generational family.
Yeah.
I have a cousin my age, which is in the 50s, my daughter that is 27, and I have a great niece that's 14 and her brother that is 7, as well as a cousin age 1. And I'm such an advocate around this. My family knows how to protect themselves from this, but it still occurred. And for me, standing in that hospital for 5 days and my daughter level at a 70 micrograms per deciliter is a death seizure coma status, right? If we received the treatment that we did, what jump-started me, I was so concerned about everybody else, because if we are being neglected at this level, what is happening to people less than that? And I couldn't turn my back away from those people, even though I can help my daughter and I had the resource to help my daughter. I couldn't leave it there, because this ultimately affects the Black community as a whole. Our generational race is affected by this. And when I did research like you did and found out really what was going on, our redlining here in Cleveland overlays our population of Black and brown disenfranchised communities, places that have been disinvested. And it's not that everybody in these spaces are poor or uneducated. It's the fact that lead has not been spoken about. I mean, this is the first time during the 2020 that so much aggression has actually been taken for lead. I've been advocating this space, feeling lonely, and I'm so glad to meet people like you and the others that I've been meeting, to know I'm not alone, because this is a, people ask for, let me hear your story. It's not a story, it's a plight.
Right, this is our life. This is our life, and this is what we're living. Yeah, and as I talk to people around the country and around my state, our stories are similar, and I hear my story and your story over and over again. The statistics are crazy. On the south side of Syracuse, if you are a young Black male child, you have a 1 in 4 chance of being lead poisoned in your own home.
Yes.
In your own home. Our Black children in Syracuse are poisoned at a rate 10 times higher than their counterparts.
Wow. And I thought we were bad in Cleveland. We're 4 times higher. And we're ranking top numbers in the nation as well as in the state. And it is outrageous that lead was known before BC.
Yeah, and we know,
the history of lead, the Roman Empire fell due to lead poisoning.
Right.
There's no way we should be having our children poisoned today in 2022. We should not even be here on this webinar. This should not be an issue.
Exactly.
At all,
exactly.
But because Black and brown children are the highest race poisoned this, I have to wonder, is racism?
Why doesn't it not get the same attention as other, especially because this is one of those childhood illnesses that is completely preventable. There's no reason for anyone's child to ever be lead poisoned. We know how to prevent it. We know what to do, but the laws are not in our favor. Housing laws, rental laws are not in the favor of the victims. They protect the landlords and the people who are causing the problem in their failure to clean up their properties, the state's failure or the federal government's failure to step in properly. Jumping through as many hoops as you need to get the HUD grant is overwhelming for some families to get through the
It is.
paperwork.
Yeah, an
And it's not
application.
cheap. It's not
The
cheap to get your house remediated.
It's like you got to go through so much, and even working and navigating through the system. And the sad part is, once your child become poisoned, you automatically get put in the system because you need the support
Those
services, or
resources.
you're running into a
Right.
space. And like mental illness, people are not connecting current conditions from lead poisoning as a root of the problem. And
Right.
our mental illness, man,
Right.
and schizophrenic and what is it, manic depression. Those are like the top 3 named mental illness now from ages 14 and up.
Right. Youth
It's
violence,
like bigger.
higher rates of teenage pregnancy. But the problem is, usually when your child is lead poisoned, and we all are trying to find those children who have been exposed, and you get your child's EBL check, you don't usually see those harsher symptoms right away. What happens is the child then gets to school at 5. So in New York State, you're required, pediatricians are required to test at 1 and 2, although 50% of our pediatricians seem to be missing 50% of their kids here in Syracuse. So we're trying to work on that problem. So we know there's 50% of kids that aren't getting tested. But at 1 and 2, all those symptoms don't show up right away. But then that child goes off to kindergarten. And then all of a sudden, they can't sit still in their seats. And they're talking. And they're touching little Johnny next to them. And of course, that sparks a fight because little Johnny doesn't like it. And now that child is labeled as the trouble child. Our children see higher rates of suspension. Meanwhile, nobody is making the connection back to lead. Nobody is recognizing that this child's behaviors are being caused because they were lead poisoned. They were given a non-traumatic brain injury from a neurotoxin.
And they got to say it like, right?
Exactly. Call it what it is.
Call it like it is. It's not just a lead poisoned child. It's a brain disease child at that point.
Right.
And, maybe the reaction would be a little different if folks called it for what it was. If we had to deal with a brain disease, maybe people would react different.
Right. And we know for every microgram per deciliter that a child's lead goes up, that child can lose an IQ point.
Yes. And they said even with kids at a 10 microgram, they lose up to 7 IQ points. So I'm looking at my daughter at a 70 and saying, oh my God.
Right. Right.
But also through research is saying with lower numbers, the impact could be just as severe as a high number, especially if it's not good nutrition or management spaces around that child to provide good prenatal care, talking about the pregnancies, before our children even come, we can actually pass lead poisoning on to our fetus, unknowing as a parent, especially when conditions are going on and they don't use the water hose on the building as they should. And I notice in the Black and Brown communities, most of the contractors don't use the water hose, and that dust is exposing to other homes. It travels close to 500 feet away from the actual area. And man, I was standing, I stopped my car. I am very adamant at stopping demolitions and telling them to stop until they use that water hose. But it was a pregnant mom with 2 small toddler children at a bus stop. And the dust was so dense that it was in my mouth from just talking. It was just settling inside of me. So I can imagine that mom, I did get lead information to her, but I didn't have a way to follow up because she was getting on a bus, but she stood in that dust for over 20 minutes. So her child probably was damaged from birth, right? We
And
have.
yeah, it's
Go ahead.
part of the issue. Part of the issue is that the education is not reaching the people that it needs to reach. So in my organization, and all of the members of my organization are affected families. That means that they have a sibling, a child, a grandchild, someone in their family who was affected by lead poisoning. And almost every single parent that has come to our organization either A, did not get that EPA pamphlet that they are supposed to receive upon renting their home when they sign their lease, and B, has not received proper education from their pediatrician, from their local health department, or from our community explaining what lead poison is. The first time they're hearing about it is when somebody says your child has lead. Now, what does that mean? Nobody is stressing the urgency of childhood lead poisoning. And then let's not even get into a lot of local health departments trying to rename it and call it lead exposure. Let's get to the difference between those two terms. Exposure just means I've been in the room with something, I've been around it. But once it enters my body and I ingest it in any way, whether inhaling it, eating it, I've now been poisoned.
Yes.
And yes, poison does set off alarms, and it should. We all should be concerned that our children are getting poisoned, that children are having their future stolen from them at 1 and 2, that slum landlords are making money off the backs of poor people. And then when we go to our government, which I found out a lot here once I started advocating, when I lead with, I'm an affected family, I get, oh, honey, don't worry about it. We know what's best for you. When I lead with, hi, I'm Oceanna Fair, I'm a retired nurse, everybody wants to talk to me.
Exactly.
And that's horrible. That's horrible. Listen to affected families. We know what we're going through. We know what our children are experiencing. We know the challenges that we have getting them healthcare, getting them educational interventions that they need, making sure that they can be productive members of society.
And that's what I did. Like for me, I was determined once I learned what lead did, my challenge to myself was to put everything I could put back into my child, because I know when a person go into a coma, come back and have to recirculate their whole self to live again, a lead poison child can too. And they don't have to be written off. And I was sure not going to let my daughter be the canary in the mine, because I was tired of our children being used as that canary. So I was determined to put in what lead took out. And yes, it worked. So from that space, we created a grassroots organization, the first in Cleveland, to start bringing the word out about lead poisoning. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody heard about it. Same thing, two things you said, your parents brought to the table, to your organization, additionally to the two of what you stated of not knowing, don't know how to manage it, never heard of it, but also not knowing the lead number. They knew their children was poisoned, but they didn't know the importance of that number, or even what the number was, or how it's measured even in the body.
What does that mean?
And to advocate when you're missing pieces, and we're supposed to be the ones, excuse me, protecting our family, right?
Exactly.
And how we, when we're missing pieces, to do so. And so our organization did a survey, over 50 people from 40 all the way to newborns, heard the same doggone thing that we were experiencing. And we came up with education and outreach and different programs that the impacted people, who knows what's going to be successful, and not wasting money and doing it at minimum cost, because we don't have the resources, but we can make a difference. And if we can make a difference with minimum dollars, we should be able to make a big, huge difference with all these dollars that's now being invested in this. But it has to
Especially
be
now.
right. It has to have the right people at the table. And the biggest component and link to a chain is the master link. If you don't have the master link with the chain, it'll fall apart. And the parents, the impacted people are the ones who is that master link. And we don't need to just have our stories told. We don't need to just be pitied or made to feel guilty, because parents get the guilt from this space and the life and the struggles of this space, and made to be our fault when we had nothing to do with it, but try to birth a healthy child the best of our abilities, right? So when you're talking about your food parties and various other social determinants that is affecting the lives of Black and Brown people in disadvantaged redline communities, how can we even heal ourselves from the lead poisoning with other trauma that comes our way? And when you get all of that impacted into your space of the redlining, the social determinants, and various things, redlining was purposely derived to cause poor wealth, health, education in Black communities. And it has succeeded in every facet, in every way. Over 90% of our kindergartners that was tested was found to be poisoned in our Cleveland schools. What is that saying? How is that affecting society as a whole? When you talk about the investment of $1 for testing, it costs more than that. But the minimum dollar of $7.95 for a test, compared to what it costs to care millions of dollars for children who become poisoned, the investment to quit it is least opposed to what it costs by not fixing it, right? And
so
then
I see in the chat.
Can we pause for a moment to describe what redlining is? I put up a slide, but if anybody wants to speak to that.
So redlining was a practice that was used by the government and banks to basically deny African Americans and minorities from owning homes. And so their neighborhoods were basically redlined, and that's what it is on the map when you see these older maps drawn out. And even on some of the titles, we have found deeds here to homes in Syracuse of homes that are outside of that redlined area. When you go back to the time when redlining was done, on that deed, it will say a Negro may not buy this home. It's still on those deeds to this day. And so that forced those communities to be in one segregated area. They were not going to grow wealth in those areas because they could not own their homes. They couldn't get financing to own their homes. So that usually meant that they were renting and paying someone else to live there. And so that's what caused these communities to be put in place. Fast forward all these decades later, like here in Syracuse, a lot of those communities are still traditionally Black and Brown. Those areas are still populated by the same people generations over and over and over again, because they've not had the resources. Sometimes they've not had the proper education. Our schools aren't funded as well as our suburban schools are here. So our children don't get the same advantages that those children get.
And even with that, a lot of our taxes from our homes is what supply our schools income. And if our taxes and our home value is brought so low, our school functioning is going to be low. And so it's so real. Is so real. Even predatory lending, and the investors that are now in the redlined area owning the property where there's no wealth opportunities because all of the homes are basically purchased by investment LPs, and they turn their names over once they get flagged and red, yellow tagged and placard, and get in a lot of trouble with the houses. They transfer themselves to a new name and therefore not held responsible for the ills of what they're doing in communities. And people have to look at the whole picture and not just the box that maybe is being worked at the moment, because lead poisoning is like a spider web. It just goes out. It starts in the circle.
Everything.
Around, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And every aspect of our lives is rooted from the poisoning that we have inside of us. Reports show the US, half of the US population is poisoned. And I laugh and say the other half is too. It's just that we didn't know our numbers or we didn't test it. But if half has gotten it, we got it on the other side as well.
So I tell a lot of my grandparents who can remember when the AIDS epidemic happened. I said, so, and I relay this to younger people by saying, what's one of the things that you guys have all heard in PSAs? Know your status, right? That's one of the things they always talk about. You should know your status. And we know that because of the AIDS epidemic. And I say, well, parents, what I'm telling you is you need to know your child's lead status. You need to know what those numbers are. You need to know that the test is done. And if you have a physician who is saying we're not going to test for some reason, fire them. You shouldn't be in that office.
Fire them. But
you want to, you want to know, what do these numbers mean? When should I be following up? What should I be doing to make sure my child is getting the best care all the way around?
Even in education.
Yeah.
I found that no educator from my daughter's kindergarten level to 12th grade was not familiar with lead. We had to introduce this to those administrators to get them educated on this, but they're educating the population. So how could you do your job effectively when you don't even know the students that you're teaching?
Exactly.
How can
There's that part,
right?
But federal guidelines does not even allow for lead poisoning to be a reason for a child to have an IEP or a 504. So that means that your child has to have coexisting conditions such as ADHD. But we know lead is a neurotoxin. We know that affects the brain. We know that you lose these IQ points the higher that it goes up. This is not rocket science.
Not at all. And we know it's going to cause anxiety. We know it's going to cause impulsiveness. We know it's going to cause people to do actions without realizing consequences. We know that impulsiveness is for sure, right?
Right, because it's affecting that frontal lobe, that decision-making part of the brain.
Exactly. And I think about all the kids that are being labeled with ADD, attention deficit disorder, and ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. All these kids are labeled like a code. It's so familiar that people don't even react or respond, but IEPs was initially for intelligent individuals to have gifted. And it's so ironic, it went from gifted children to the population that is poisoned and have lost IQs and have a brain disease. Now, that's ironic to me. Our education, if I was an educator, I would have been screaming, raising all kinds of sand, saying, why do we have so many kids in our IEPs now? What is the problem? Something is wrong. And that particular arena never raised a question about all the kids and the behavior issues that's going on. And I said, now it shouldn't even be regular educated teachers. They should be all taught special ed so they know how to be creative in dealing with the children that have as lead poisoning, as well as other traumatic issues going around them that they have received, because every child, every person learns differently. It takes a difference in how we learn, the way we learn, and but I know for a fact with my daughter, you can learn it as a lead poison child. I know for a fact the members of our organization who have now can say their child is as good as they could be because they learned how to advocate, manage, and bring solutions to their space. And now their child is able to be productive better than what it would have, their child would have been without the assistance. And more need this, more families need to know this space and not made to feel you're not bringing your child for their lead test. How about the doctors who are not testing for lead in the spaces that they're supposed to? You know, I was really appalled in one place, a physician literally stated to a co-worker of mine that if we were incentivized, maybe we'd do the testing. I'm glad I wasn't at the meeting.
That's your job. That's your job, sir. As a nurse, didn't get to decide which doctor's orders I was going to execute or not execute. That was my job, to go and execute the orders that I was given. That was my job, to give my patients the best possible care that I could give them. And that is his job, and that is his obligation to the children that are in his care. And if he's talking like that, then maybe he needs to reconsider his career choice.
Exactly.
I have no problem calling people out, whether it's a doctor, a politician, a teacher, a landlord, whomever.
Anybody.
We are damaging children's brains. And says, when did children become sacrificial lambs, that was allowed for the almighty dollar?
And that's all.
Did that become okay?
And yeah, we don't want to deal with lead, so we shun lead. But guess what? We have to deal with it. Our criminal justice system is full of population of Black males. It's the number one race incarcerated.
Exactly. The school to prison pipeline
is the number one race that get poisoned by lead.
Yeah.
And that correlation is there.
Exactly.
People aren't looking at the dots because really no one looks at the impacted humanity aspect of lead poisoning. It's as if people don't exist, even though we live it in the world, in the real world. I guess we don't exist, and we're not part of society where we're everyday part of society. We're humans. And when the human infrastructure, which I use that term because it seems like everybody's talking about infrastructure, but nobody has yet mentioned about the impacts of the human and the funding to go in that space.
Right.
Because it's a space that's been neglected too long. And I have to ask the question, is it because of redlining and racism within our United States and our presence that we have not yet rectified this? And when the mental illness of our teenagers starts soaring, it didn't surprise me because I'm studying the human space because I had to be prepared for my daughter early in life. I wasn't waiting to the year she turned a year. I was studying 5 to 10 years out so I could be prepared and I could know what to do for her to better her body and prepare her for adulthood to have success.
Right. And our children have benefited from that because you and I are outspoken, but there are so many parents who are like some of the things that my parents in my group experience. They experience retaliation from landlords. So suddenly their child is lead poisoned, that gets reported to the county. Then the landlord comes and says, I'm raising your rent $300 next month. They can no longer live there. This is the biggest expense that any family has out of their budget, is their shelter expense.
Yes.
So they are priced out of the home only for the next family to move in and for it to happen again.
And cycle around.
Right. We had one family who had their heat and hot water cut off for 28 days in the middle of December. Syracuse winters are cold. We are in the snow belt. Matter of fact, old man winter arrived this morning. We woke up to 30-degree temperatures here. In the middle of December, it's even colder. And to have your heat and hot water cut off simply because you asked for your home to be made safe. And these landlords are getting away with these types of things.
Yes.
So
And
these parents are afraid to speak up because even though they're in this bad home, they don't know if they move, what's going to happen. Due to the high poverty rate here in Syracuse, most families living in those areas move once a year because they get priced out of their homes.
yes.
So,
And even if not with that, with our rent increase, where we are now with rental space of anything, the families can't afford to kind of travel around to do better because they have to go where their income allow them. I had a family who mom is a risk assessor, and her daughter and son-in-law had to move in a lead-ridden home only because that's what they can afford.
right.
And thank God their mom was a risk assessor and she was able to help them close off rooms and let them know where the kids couldn't go. And through the grace of God, the kids were okay. But again, everybody don't have the privy of knowing the information, and they're alone there. Families are so alone. We have to advocate for families of children being taken from them, removed from the home, especially with the males we find it with. They're more aggressive with their lead. And they jump off of things and they bang their heads up and they really pretty much abuse themselves physically. And the that are there, they thought the kids were being physically abused by someone in the home where they were doing it themselves, and they disrupted the family, not listening to the mom, trying to say what's going on. That family went through trauma just by being removed for a year, trying to get back together. And it didn't just hit the mother and that child, it hit the siblings and everything. And lead poison don't just hit that individual child, it hits the whole family. Everyone that loves that child is affected by lead, but then society is impacted by that child. So it's important individual, it's society as a whole actually being impacted by every individual that is poisoned. I was just reading the article today, and I'll send it to Becca so she can have it for resources, that if a person wasn't poisoned, their annually salary from being a child to a lifetime could be $314 million towards society if it wasn't impacted.
Right, but instead we're spending that money in Medicaid costs, in criminal justice costs, in other areas. So I get my brother's insurance statements for me to review to make sure that he got all the treatment he's supposed to get. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in Medicaid costs a year for him, just so that he could be safe, just so that he can have the proper care that he needs. And this all happened because of a silent predator that my parents didn't even know was in our home. Microscopic dust that you cannot see with the naked eye, but your child is inhaling, your child is crawling around in it on your floor and you're not even knowing it's there. And then toddlers have that hand to mouth contact, and so they're ingesting the lead. Those costs alone that we're spending every year, year in and year out, by not fixing this problem. In our county, they declared war on lead 50 years ago. 50 years later, they get upset with me because I say, maybe we need to take a step back and we need to examine what we are doing. We know some things are working and we see those things working, but we know there's a lot that's not working. And we need to re-examine those areas and see what changes we need to make sure that we're not missing children, to make sure that we are finding houses with lead before we find children with lead. Because right now we're being proactive to the situation instead of preventative to the situation.
Yes, exactly. And even though practices are being developed to try to get to the homes. It's still going to be a slow process. And as these things take place, children are still poisoned each and every day.
Yeah, our city passed
Children,
a lead ordinance 2 years ago. 2
okay,
years ago. That lead ordinance is just now being enforced, just now. And they're already 2 years behind in inspections. Those inspections are also generated by our rental registry. They only have about 50% compliance with the rental registry. So in addition to being 2 years behind on the 50% you do have registered, you have the whole other 50% that's not even on the registry. So how do you intend to go find these homes?
and see, for us in Cleveland, we have a lead safe certification practice that started in 2020. And, you know, it was really great because one of the biggest and best things of it is that they raise resources for the landlords and not really penalize the landlord, because we know it's not the landlord's fault that the lead paint is in a home. We don't go after the paint companies that
That
did.
caused it in the first place.
Like for us, I tried to sue Sherwin-Williams here locally in Cleveland with another parent whose son died from lead poison. And that case got dismissed without us even going to court, seeing no paperwork or anything coming our way. We just hear folks coming telling us it got squashed and we could never sue ever
Right,
here in the city.
right.
And it's like,
Because the
you know,
laws are made to protect the cause of the problem and not the victims. And we know we have good landlords and we have bad landlords. Now, a good landlord is one who we say, this is what's happening in your home. This is how you can fix it. This is how we can help it. And they proceed forth with getting that done. And then
yes,
you have landlords. So we have one notorious landlord in our area who now has his nephew working for him, has been a landlord. Matter of fact, over 30 years now. So 30, 40 years. He knows all about lead. He has no excuse to have lead in any home that he rents. Yet this man owns whole city blocks in our city. He is the #1 paid landlord from our local social service department. So you are paying him to poison the very people that you're charged with protecting.
yes. And, you know, like you said, we have good landlords and we have bad. Our investor landlords is the most horrendous.
The ones that are out of the country.
With them, and you can't do anything to the the property. So like with our certification here, we did great with the local landlords. Our problem is running now into the space of the investor homes that we can't get to. And again, most of the time they run from their troubles because they are transferred out of that name and have it in somebody else's name tomorrow, and it starts all over again. But
and this is why we need to push for point of sale laws and things like that, because if nothing is done at the point of sale, the new owner cannot deny that they knew there was lead in the home at the time. It was done at the point of sale and you were presented with that information. Now, if you chose to not have the old landlord or the old owner take care of that lead, well, now that's your problem and you need to get it done.
That's right. And that will nip a lot of that for the old housing problem, opposed to trying to catch it along the way. Abatement is I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, we did have a question on that actually, on disclosure of hazards. And the question was, do other states have a lead paint waiver when buying real estate? The person seems to recall signing something acknowledging this and not holding the seller responsible when they bought their home in Montgomery, Alabama.
Right. So in New York State, you get the EPA waiver that tells you there could be lead paint in your home. So neither you, the buyer, or the seller are acknowledging that it's there. You just know that it could be there. So that still gives these landlords plausible denial to say, well, I didn't know it was there, even though they should. One of the laws we have been pushing on the state level here, though, is that requiring a point of sale test. That way, nobody can deny it. Either it tested positive or it didn't test positive upon point of sale. And so at that point, either the buyer can say, you need to fix this before I buy it, or the buyer takes responsibility for it. But trying to get those laws through are almost impossible. We couldn't get that through last year because basically what we got back was it was an election year. A lot of those seats were up. So we'll try it again this go round. But meanwhile, more children are being poisoned because of the failure to act.
And, you know, the impacted person, seeing this and living it each and every day, we don't have time to waste no more. We don't have no time to play with the poisoning of children in no kind of fashion. We don't need to continue to waste money in spaces that have been done the same old way. As you said, we need to come up with new ways. If nothing of COVID-19 showed
And we
up.
learned a lot. We learned a lot from
Learned a
COVID,
lot
and we
about
need to be
that.
taking that knowledge and we need to be applying it to other things like lead poisoning.
And
Lead
we need to know
poisoning, right?
that
Lead poisoning is the only time
yeah,
where someone can
the
poison your
trigger is-
child and not be criminally charged for it.
Yep.
Literally. If anybody poisoned your child any other way on purpose, they would be criminally charged. But lead poisoning, oftentimes, I have had landlords blame parents and say, well, you don't clean your home. My mother's home, we could eat off the floor in her house, literally. Like there was, and Robin, I know you came from the era that on Saturday morning when you heard the gospel music, you knew what time it was. That house was spotless at all times.
yes,
So
and
to blame the parent and say this is your fault for something that they could not even see. One of our local colleges, Cornell, has a video up on their YouTube page called The Silent Predator. And I think that describes lead perfectly. It's a silent predator that most of us don't even know it's there because we can't see it, we can't taste it, we can't smell it. But every time we open that window up and down or shut that door, open and shut it, that dust is in the air and our babies are breathing it in.
And breathing it in. And even from the outside, from neighboring houses that are chipping and pulling. My great nephew actually got poisoned from a neighbor's garage. The flakes flew into their backyard. When they got the inspection of their home, their living quarter space was good. But it was coming from the neighbor home that was exposing the outside of their environment where the kids were playing. And that's my youngest great nephew got poisoned from a neighbor house.
Yeah.
And the neighbor had no clue about the flame and peeling paint. And I'm going to get to it, but they didn't know the hazards to it. From an individual that people say, all you know is lead and lead is your life. And do you talk about anything but lead? No, I'm not going to stop talking about lead until people get it. You can't stop talking about this until people really get it.
Well, I tell my local county exec and mayor all the time, there's an easy way to get me to go away. And I remind them that I'm retired now, so I have nothing better to do all day but than to harass them on this issue. It's just to take care of it. Do what I'm asking you to do. And we don't have to keep having these public conversations about it.
And you know, someone
put my children first, because as I see it, all the children in Syracuse are my children.
That's right.
Right. We came up on that. It takes a village. That was how we grew up. Every person going down the block knew us, knew our parents, and that village helped raise us. And so that's how I see all the kids of Syracuse. These are my children. So once you start protecting my children, I'll stop harassing you in public. I'll stop calling you out every time I see you. Matter of fact, I will stand at a press conference with you and praise your good deeds once you do the work.
Exactly. And, you know, folks say to me, you know, Robin, you act like you owed something. Excuse me? I am owed something. I'm owed something for all these generation of kids being poisoned, and my child is included. And once you become a mom, you're a mom over every child. Exactly. There's no generation of motherhood. You a parent for all. And all these babies, no matter where they are around this country, is all of our babies. And we're talking about a lot of kids.
And those
Totally.
children are owed the same safety,
They are.
comfort in their homes that their suburban counterparts experience. That child's home should be the safest place that they go every day. Because we used to say school is the safest place, but that's not even safe anymore.
That's not safe.
Safest place that child should go every day is in their home.
And in fact,
Going home and being poisoned.
that's what they say, your home is your castle. Your home is where you should be able to escape all ills of society. Your home should be the most healthiest place for you to be. And just like even with COVID, we were stuck in our homes.
Which
And
is even
the lead
worse.
rate went up.
Less children
It
were
really
tested during COVID. More
went-
children were locked in into
Yes,
the
right.
homes
It
that are
has their-
poisoning them. So we don't even, it's just mind-boggling that this has been allowed to go on. I think, Robin, I shared with you in our last conversation, so we have these maps floating around Syracuse and they show where the lead poisoning is. And then you take a map of the third grade New York State test for reading and you overlap that where the most children are failing, it aligns with the lead poisoning.
That's
Then
right.
you take the map of childhood poverty where the most impoverished children are. So 98% of the children in Syracuse City School District fall below the poverty level. That fits perfectly over the lead. And then finally, our city has seen an increase in youth violence and gunshots, and those gunshot maps and youth arrest fit perfectly.
And can I say, so do Cleveland's, right? So
But we have to draw a picture for legislators to get the connection. This is all connected. These things would not be aligning perfectly if they were not all tightly intertwined. So let's start solving the problem. Stop treating the symptoms. If you come into the hospital with cancer, the doctor isn't treating your nausea, your pain. He's treating the cancer. He's treating the cause of the problem. Stop treating the symptoms and let's start treating the cause of the problem.
That's right. And
Absolutely.
just because it's not reversible and it seems like nothing could be done for that person who is lead poisoning, and whatever that outcome is just going to be that outcome, a human is more than that.
Your body's always in a constant state of trying to heal and right itself. And even though the brain has been damaged, we have saw that the brain can do amazing things. And given the proper intervention, new connections can be made. But our children need those early interventions. They need access to that stuff.
And I can speak on
we're
that,
not getting that.
right? My daughter, grade point average to this day, she's in her master's. She's carrying 3.47, 3.67 grade point average. She is going for her master's. She was able to go through school with I got phone calls every day, but they gave calls opposed to suspending her because all those calls I was getting, she would have been going home every day.
Oh, we don't even want to talk about suspension rates.
So the phone calls was grateful. I was grateful for them, but I got them every year, all day until she graduated school. But she did end up going to John Hay Early College, which was accelerated for a 3-year high school. And in there, she carried that grade point average, but she also took college courses so that she could graduate with 32 college courses or associate degree. She took the credits and went to her first year bachelor college, and she got 2 degrees, one in criminology as her major, and her minor was sociology. And she's into her master now for social work, period, because she wants to get back to the impacted children of lead poisoning to do something for them, because as a caseworker for Children Family Services and the roles she has had, she sees all of the impact. And she was a child impacted that advocated from the age of 4 till she turned 12. And she said, "Mommy, I can't do it no more." She was actually 10. And she said, Mom, I can't do that anymore because I know what's in me. I know what's going to happen to me or could happen to me. And I can't live thinking about that each and every second of my life. So I can't advocate with you anymore, but please don't let my poisoning be in vain. And in 2005, that's when we started our organization, Concerned Citizens Organized Against Lead, so that we can help the families, because it seemed like we were being ignored. We are
ignored.
we
See,
are ignored.
The legislators here, code enforcement, the head of code enforcement actually, well, I shouldn't say code enforcement, his boss, the head of business and neighbor development, has actually been known to run out the other side of City Hall when I come in. But they know I will sit outside your door. You got to go to your car sometime, but we're going to have a discussion about this house and this child that you're ignoring and get this taken care of, however you want to do it. But I got time, and I keep reminding them that I'm retired. I've got time to do nothing but annoy you and harass you and make you do your job.
And
I have the time that my parents have to work, and I get that they have to work to support their families. And I'm in a blessed position where my husband is working, so I am retired and I can be out doing these things. And I tell them all the time, I have nothing but time on my hands to make you as miserable as you want to be until you can do what we're asking you to do.
And that's for this
what we're asking you for. I hate when they try to label it as an entitlement. This is not an entitlement. Living in a healthy house is not an entitlement. They should be living in a healthy house. You're not doing me a favor. You're doing your job. So don't say when you finally go inspect that house that I asked you to inspect, oh, you owe me one. I owe you nothing. I pay my taxes, pays your salary, go do your job. I don't owe you a favor. This is your job. And whatever it takes for me to make you do your job at this point, because children are suffering, that's what I'm going to do. My goal is that my grandchildren's children do not have to carry on this family curse, because that's what it is for families. It's a family curse.
It's generational.
I recently spoke at an event about a week ago with the woman from our local county health department. And she had to stand before a congregation, a Black church, and admit in church that one of her nurses treated a great-grandmother with lead poisoning, the grandmother, the grandchild, and then the great-grandchild. That should be an embarrassment on our city that that's happening and on our county. And why weren't interventions put in place? And the reason is because the family accepted that that was their fate. They didn't feel like they could fight. They didn't feel empowered to make a difference because they didn't think anybody would listen to them. And I will tell them all the time, I will help you advocate. I will stand behind you. But if you can't speak, I will speak for you. Let me know what you need.
Just give me permission.
So I want to just give folks a chance to ask questions in our last few minutes here, because we have you here and you both have such extraordinary expertise in so many things. So if folks want to ask any questions, you can do that in the Q&A in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute you in our last minutes. But go ahead and keep talking until we get some questions in. Sorry.
Actually say there is some good comments in the chat that maybe if you guys wanted to go through some of those.
Make sure we didn't miss anyone's questions, but a lot of people ask, why our families don't move. We discussed why they don't move. Most can't afford to. Why don't they speak up? Most don't feel empowered to, or they worry about the retaliation that's going to come. A lot of people are afraid of the medical community. We're not always treated as fairly, and that's not to say all doctors. I'm a retired nurse. I work with some of the best doctors in my community. And so I know there's great doctors out there, but that's not always the case.
It's not always the case. And
we live in
And
a
Richard asked a question about chelation, or shared an experience about chelation. And I know, Robin, your daughter had to go through chelation a number of times, and the trauma of having to hold your child down. In his case, he mentioned.
Actually, I did not hold my child down. They took her out of the room and took her to a treatment room so that she wouldn't identify the pain to a hospital at all.
Right.
And that's that was traumatic.
Mhm.
I cried when her numbers rebound because her number actually went down from a 70 to 27 with the first round of chelation. And they wait 2 hours afterwards, and chelation pulls all the minerals out of a child body, and it has to be replaced by IV for 5 days of the good minerals. It's torturous. It is really torturous shot to do, and I feel sorry for you have to sit there and hold the children to go through that. I know that placed you in a bad space too, because you know exactly probably what I'm talking about being right there. It's not a fun place. And that's the only result. I won't say the only, because now that I'm educated, I would probably have did something else to try to remove outside of the
Right.
killing afterwards.
But we
Because
know probably back then that was probably the best therapy you were getting, and we know we've made advances since then. But that was the best you had at the time, and that's what killed me with our government and our sometimes even our health department, because I can't tell you how many times they say, "Oh, we have great education and great educational materials." That's nice. What good are they if they don't reach the people who need them?
that's right. If
They're
it's not,
nothing but useless pieces of paper, and they're not getting where they need to be. We know
and
so much more now.
that's a lot with our, with our space. If it's not reaching the impact, no matter what the goal or the mission is of whatever that entity is, if it's not reaching the impacted person, making a difference and bringing equity to the impacted space, then the work is not really being done or satisfied, because at the end of the day, the impacted is still in the same space of where they started, and no one's looking for a handout. We wish we had our own resources to even fix some of our ills we're speaking about, but due to redlining and racism, we don't have that wealth built up to have resources.
So I don't have my legal
Another
expert on the call tonight. I see some messages coming up in the chat. So I don't know if there is a way to hold states liable for putting citizens. I'm sure there is. But I know here in New York, trying to sue a landlord or anyone for lead is near impossible. The insurance companies don't even cover lead paint on a home. So even if you can sue a landlord, there's usually no money there to really help the family. And we only have a handful of attorneys in our entire state that can really handle it. So I'm in Syracuse. One of the attorneys that would be closest to me to help with that, she is over 3 hours away in Albany, New York. So that I'm not sure. There should be a way, but
there was another question on the California lawsuit, which is a little bit of a special case. I'm happy to mention that we asked our attorney general here in Michigan if we could file something similar to go after the paint manufacturers and others for funding. And it's going to be different in different places in different states. Right. And our attorney general, who is amazing in Michigan, said we don't have the laws on the books to be able to do that. And so unfortunately, a lot of this is going to be covered by different state laws. Yeah. And there's not like a way to go after them for a big federal lawsuit. Right. At this point. So it's going to depend on your state. Do you have an attorney general who's awesome? Do you have the laws on the books that you could even sue them? Are you still within what they call the statute of limitations to actually file a lawsuit? So it gets really hard, like you're saying, Oceanna, to actually get any legal recourse
is.
here.
Our state attorney general here recently started suing problematic landlords. So she actually won a case here in Syracuse. That was the first one. She started 3 lawsuits, one in Buffalo, one in Rochester, and one here in Syracuse. The landlord here in Syracuse, I see Paul Shavari, that's my legal expert, honing in there. He had poisoned 18 children in his homes. So we're hoping that that lawsuit will send a message to other landlords, and that our Attorney General, Letitia James, will keep those lawsuits coming to send a message that we're not going to tolerate it anymore, and we're going to hold people accountable.
There's 2 questions that came up. One, the question, do families who are potentially at risk test their children? The answer is most families don't know they need to test their children. That comes from the pediatric space, that we're relying on the medical space to lead us to this, because we really don't know it's an issue until our children are poisoned. Then a known space to us. But prior to this, you know, with the talks now about lead, folks are hearing the word and maybe doing some research on it because of the aggressiveness of what's occurring now, but it still is very slim and unlikely based off of the parents I'm still encountering each and every day. Their story is the same as mine from 23 years ago.
What I would tell any medical personnel that are in the room, and I had the privilege of speaking to some pediatricians here in Syracuse, New York, a couple of weeks ago at Grand Rounds, is if it's not urgent to you, it's not urgent to your patient.
That's right.
So if you're just giving them a questionnaire, and you got to remember, not everybody's reading at the same level. So that questionnaire, one, may be too hard for them to read, or they may not understand. If you're not making it urgent, then it's not urgent to them.
That's right.
And I have heard that time again. Well, when I was told about lead, or when I was given the slip to go have the lead test done, doctors didn't seem that concerned, so we didn't stop at the lab and get it done. That's one of the things we've heard. We've heard tons of reasons on why this testing isn't getting done. But if it's important to you as a provider, it's going to be important to that family.
Yes, and another reason that people may not get the testing is that most of the labs are not at the location where they're being seen at for their appointment. And if you have to travel with children to another location that you were not prepared for and not ready and set for, and it's not made to be urgent for you to,
and where you fall into a queue.
Exactly.
With every other clinic.
Exactly.
Paul, or Robin, I see the question Paul asked is for you. He's asking about your coalition.
Do you mind if I just jump in for a second? Like, I mean, some of the Glenn Coalition partners are working on this, but Maine, where I live, like actually requires lead tests for all children age 1 and 2, right? That should be the standard. It shouldn't be up to the parent to ask for it. It should be that it's required, and all pediatricians are doing it, because I've also heard stories of people like not being in the risk area and their kid never being tested and then they're lead poisoned. But it shouldn't be up to the parent to have to ask. That should be up to the provider to make sure it's happening.
So it is required here in New York State to test all children at 1 and 2. And we're still missing 50% of those children. And I know as a nurse, I know you've all heard about patients being on blood thinners. So if you come in the morning and I send you to a lab to get your blood checked, because we need to usually adjust your blood thinner, and I don't hear back from you by 5 o'clock, I'm on the phone with you. I want to know where you are, how soon you can get. We may even send you to an urgent care or an emergency room at that point to get that blood work done, because we don't want you to trip and nick your knee and bleed out somewhere because maybe your blood thinner level is too high. But we're following up on those. And what I'm finding here is that when a child misses that lead test at 1 and 2, nobody's following up to say, why didn't it get done? It's not being made urgent to the families. So it is required in New York State, but that's still not getting the job done. So we need to take a step back and really examine what are the barriers that are preventing families, or maybe even preventing physicians' offices from getting it followed up. Is the reimbursement too low and they need another staff person? Maybe that reimbursement needs to be raised so that they can afford another staff person in that office to follow up on those tests.
And I think it's really rare. There are only a handful of states that have a universal testing requirement. And like you're saying, there are challenges to do that. There are machines where that can be done with a simple finger prick test in the office. And the easiest way to get kids tested is to do it right there when they're getting their vaccines and things like that. So there's some other best practices that we're looking at in Michigan in particular, so that we don't have a law that's universal testing. So that's the first step. But like you're saying, is making sure it's actually effective means that we need to follow up with people, and we need to make it as easy as possible for kids to get tested. And so there was someone who asked, aren't all kids supposed to be tested for lead? And there is, like we were just saying, not in every state. The laws are different everywhere. There's no, all children on Medicaid are supposed to be tested for lead. However, there are a lot of children that live in pre-1978 homes that are not on Medicaid, that are not, falling into that.
Right.
And there was a question from Paul in reference to how effective or not effective is the Cleveland Lead Coalition for making needed change. I can say it was very effective because it's the first time 500 members is part of an organization working on lead poisoning. So that alone is a success. Just getting the attention of the private public sector is twofold for me because I see it in two different ways. I feel the lead safe practice is a great way for inexpensive, get it done and get it fixed and get kids protected. But because I'm an advocate to end lead poisoning, I'm more for an abatement to be done and just get it over with, because every 2 years we have to go through the lead certification. And we know that paint could get chipped and peeled or damaged just from children playing, right? So we can go through the practice, but we can also recreate areas that become hazard within that same home that just got lead safe. So for me, I'm an advocate for full abatement, even though I fully support the Lead Safe Coalition, because again, it's a first step practice. It is a way inexpensively to secure the home is safe. But ultimately, abatement should be really taking place in all homes, and the government should pay whatever it costs, because we just went through the expense of what lead poisoning costs for a person to be taken care of in the millions. It would be
Billion with a B.
abate. It'd be cheaper to abate homes opposed to having lead poisoned children. So that investment should be in there for full abatement, in my opinion.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Trying to make sure we didn't miss.
Yeah, we had a couple of things that I put in the chat. One related again to testing was, as you were saying, Oceanna, that, folks don't follow through and go get the lab test done. So thinking about how else can you effectuate behavior to get parents to act on that. I think you talked about that a little bit with raising the urgency.
Definitely. As a nurse, I realized when I was talking to a patient and that patient realized that I was concerned, they took what they needed to do more seriously. So we need to be doing that same thing with parents when we're talking to them about their children, because I can tell you, if you're concerned, they're going to be concerned. If they see that this is troubling to you, they're going to follow up to make sure they know. We need to be telling them what can happen if their child is lead poisoned. I know on the little questionnaire that we're given here in New York State, it just basically asks you, and the first question is flawed. Was your home built prior to 1978? If you're renting the home, you have no idea when the home was built. If you bought the home, you probably looked at it at some point. But if you're renting, the first question's already flawed. You have no idea. I would rather see them change that question to maybe, do you live in the following zip codes? Because we know that we have certain zip codes that are extremely high. But maybe start there. Asking if they when the home was built isn't helpful. We're also, Syracuse is a big refugee resettlement area. You hand that English questionnaire to somebody who doesn't speak the language, it's useless.
That's right. That's right.
They don't know what it says. And so they're coming to this country new. They don't know about lead poisoning. That may not be an issue. I say that even with people who are transplants to our city, who may be coming from either another area in the state where it's not a big deal, or even another area in the country where they have things more under control. Coming here, they have no idea that Syracuse is in a lead poisoning crisis, as I say. So we need to be reading those questions to the patient. When they come in the room, just like we ask them, are you on XYZ med? Do you do XYZ thing? We ask parents how they're feeding their children. We need to be asking these questions on the lead questionnaire also. The
And
fact that we're taking time to ask it, raise some awareness to the patient that this is something I need to pay attention to.
And with that, not having that urgency, even though I had to go weeks for my daughter was 4,
Yeah.
She didn't get down to single digits until 14. So we were going to get testing every week for a week. And do you know, I had to demand her testing to continue, even though her numbers are still high. And again, the urgency and the space didn't come from the provider side. It was just me and that parent that gave me the urgency. But a lot of people don't know. And we have parents that say they didn't do anything for 8 years. They come to our organization, they get educated on it, and then they're stunned and they're hurt, and they feel like their opportunity to have helped their child has passed, even though we know you can start at any time. When you find out, do what you can do at the best you can do, and it's never too late. But if the urgency doesn't come from who we feel the experts are, and a partnership to be made. There's not a client and a patient, it's a now partnership. And people should be looking at this as a partnership and not a patient client. And I'm speaking on things that's going into the wraparound services of lead poisoned children. Don't look at them as the client. Don't treat the family as if you're bringing something for them. This is a unified partnership. You wouldn't have your job if it wasn't for my child, but we need to fix this anyway, right? So we have to come together as partners.
Yes, yes.
We got equal, we want the same outcome, and we should be working together to get that outcome, and not on as that patient client.
I want to make sure we don't skip over Cecil's comment, because he's right. Lead can come from other sources. Soil around my drip line is how my granddaughter was poisoned, but also in clay pottery, in certain spices, and certain makeups that are imported. I tell everybody, do not buy crayons from the dollar store that come from China. Spend the extra couple dollars and get the Crayola. It is so much more worth it. But yes, there are multiple sources from where lead can come. We know that here in New York State, especially in the city of Syracuse, the biggest source is lead paint chips. We have a pretty good our water pipes are pretty good. They have updated that system. So the biggest source is paint chips, lead dust, and has, in our case, where the lead was peeling all around the outside of the house, that drip line where the kids played near the house, that soil was contaminated.
And for Cleveland, our areas is the old housing stock. We have like over 90% of our housing stock that's old. So it is the paint and chipping and peeling. But our environment from the gas and industrial soot and different things getting into our environment, we found with starting outside gardening and greening that a lot of our soil is contaminated. So under our Green Sprout program, everyone who goes under that program, they have to get their soil tested, and everyone who got their soil tested has came back with high levels of lead. So right now we can say a lot of Cleveland environment soil is there. But then we also have, basically it's our houses and our soil. But the other products is jewelry. I actually bought a pair of earrings from a store and it contained lead. So we have to be careful with our jewelry, our makeup, as you had said, clothing. My daughter ordered a pair of shoes, beautiful pastel shoes, but it had a tag in there. Please do not let children handle, contained lead. So it's actually in our clothing. There have been Halloween costumes that have had it, lunch boxes for kids. And these is all kid things. If anyone remembers Shrek glasses from McDonald's when the movie Shrek came out, they had to recall the glasses because it was paint on the outside of those glasses that they were given out in the Happy Meals for the Shrek movie.
And of course, the toddlers are putting those glasses immediately in their mouth instead of on their face. So yeah.
Yeah, and it has been in baby food as well. And even with purses, and that the purses, they range from very areas, Macy's stores all the way down. So it's not about just inexpensive. Candle wicks, and you have to be careful because candle wicks were made out of lead. And so that's a product. And I also found lead in garden hoses. Yep. Never looked at that piece of cardboard that hold the garden hose and you think it's insignificant on that piece of cardboard.
We all drank from on a hot summer day as kids. From the garden hose.
When I seen it in garden hoses. So there's multitudes of places that lead poisoning can still be.
And Tracy pointed out that cumulative impact, which is another bill we're trying to get passed this year in the Senate. So keep our fingers crossed that here in New York State that we get that to our governor to get signed. See how far we get.
And before we go quickly, I just want to, we can't forget about the pregnant women getting tested. Please, if it's anybody working around pregnant women, ensure that they are getting a test during their pregnancy. A lot of that is not being done as well.
And look at those childhood blood records for that pregnant mom, especially if she comes from an impacted area.
Yes.
So I want to thank you both and everybody, all the other panelists and all the attendees. And if there's any parting thoughts that you want to leave us with, let's wrap it up with that. Maybe something hopeful that folks can think about and take home. There was a lot of information. As we said, we'll share the slides and we'll share the recording with everyone. And I just wanted to thank you both for joining us and sharing your stories and just a wealth of knowledge with everybody today. Thank you.
Thank you. I would say lead poison is preventable, so let's prevent it.
Right. And thank you for having us. And the reason we're called Families for Lead Freedom now, because now is the time to make change and we all have the power to do so. So keep putting pressure on those decision makers, keep bringing families to the table. And believe me, if we all work together, my grandchildren's children will not carry on this family curse.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone for allowing us to be here and sharing our space with you all as well. And hopefully we were able to help you along your way as you do your work.
Yes, and Rebecca and Tracy have our emails there on the slide. If anybody has further questions, feel free to email us and I'll get back to you.
Yes, we will.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.